Happy
Hello.
Friday, Steve.
Happy Friday to you, Maxine. It's May 16th, another crazy week in identity.
I don't know. I listen to that music on our intro more and more, and I'd say I gotta love it. I'm starting to rock out to it, So
That's so great. That's so great. I've had a few people say that they've listened to it on repeat, so it's a little bit sticky. It's a little
it
bit
is.
sticky.
It's that 80s sound, man. It was the soundtrack to certain people's lives.
Yeah, great. Well, let's get into the topics. We've got a lot to cover. The first one that I want to bring up is what I was doing earlier in the week in San Francisco, which was attending the Marketplace Risk Conference, which is for the trust and safety community in marketplaces and digital platforms. But more and more, I'm seeing fintechs and crossover into other industries that are very interested in what the large platforms are doing to fight fraud.
It's all converging because fraud is the key, and certainly from my perspective, identity is the solution. So what was the most interesting thing for you at Marketplace Risk this week?
The number one most interesting thing was Erin West's keynote. She opened the conference with a deep dive into how sophisticated the fraud has gotten through these rogue nations that are building fraud as an industry. She shared
Yeah.
photos of different, they look like office parks where they house, unfortunately, they're trafficked individuals from other countries that convince them to go there with job prospects, and then they turn them into fraudsters that are sending the text messages trying to hook people into these pig butchering scams where they steal their money, into romance scams. And she went into detail about how these operations work, including photos and stuff of them. It's
So
crazy.
instead of people being locked to sewing machines producing producing, doing, basically slave labor to produce t-shirts, now they've um inculcated this entire fraud as an industry service, which is amazing to me because now we've gone from fraud as a service to fraud as an industry. And how quickly did that happen?
It is an industry, and it is sickening to see satellite photos, which Aaron had, of before and after of these what were small towns, sometimes resort-like towns, and now there are massive buildings and complexes that have no other purpose there. There's no other economy to support that except for the illicit
Wow.
stealing of money. So yeah, that was the most enlightening thing for me. I've heard a lot about Aaron. Seen her content on LinkedIn and seen she's done other presentations at different conferences, but to see her passion and to watch her speak on these topics was
Truly
pretty great.
frightening.
Yeah,
Really, truly frightening.
yeah.
Well,
Well,
that's a
while I
that's
was
a
in,
happy way to start Friday
I know,
morning.
like, all right, we're done now. Let's go back to fighting the fraud. There was, I'll say, with San Francisco, I was pleasantly surprised. It had been about a year since I was there that things are looking really good in San Francisco. The streets are looking great, and
That's
these
nice.
Waymos are everywhere.
Oh,
And I took
Waymo.
one. So this is a video I published. I turned off the audio, but here I am trying to figure out how to use it. I'm so used to going into an Uber and it's already unlocked, and I couldn't figure out how to unlock it. And then I got
Oh,
in, and it's just
so you have
this
to unlock it through the phone.
you unlock it through your phone, but then later it presented a beta feature. Would you like to auto unlock the thing? So I think they're in experimentation phase. They're still trying to figure out the best experience, but I had a great time in that Waymo. It
I
was fun.
I have not been in a Waymo. I have Waymo envy.
Mhm. Well, I
I wanted
hear
to buy a Waymo. I
beyond.
wouldn't do it where I live because too much of the driving is on,
Mm,
busy streets with, like, 40 to 60 mile an hour speed limits, and, like, these weird roads where it's 65 and then you hit stoplights. And so I'd be a little bit wary of doing it where I live, but it seems like in San Francisco, these are, like city streets with 25 mile an hour speed limits. So it seems
yeah,
like it would be a good
it's
option.
laid out with grids, and there's different places that it can go. It is limited, but I think Waymo is in Los Angeles and more like West LA. There are some zones in Austin, I think a few other cities. So it may not be complete ubiquitous rollout, but there are certain areas where perhaps we see autonomous car zones where certain city centers are you're only allowed to have those cars. And then I think a lot of the accidents and things that have happened with those types of cars is they're hard to predict other drivers or pedestrians running. So I think we'll see a lot of innovation here in the coming years.
Well, and especially in places where they're putting in these, essentially taxes on, driving in the real busy parts of the city. It would make a lot more sense to limit the number of, regular car traffic and then have more of these so people can get around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go into some identity topics. This was one that you
Okay. Oh
shared
my
with
God.
me, and it has to do with the Department of Homeland Security and their new BYOC policy. Bring your own chair.
Yeah,
What are
this
your
was a
thoughts
little
on this?
disconcerting. This is the OBIM, the Office of Biometric Identity Management, which lives in DHS. And, when we're talking about biometric data, everybody is concerned, right? Everybody is like, okay, this is super sensitive data. How is it being stored and managed? Who has access to it? So stressing people out in that office because they don't have chairs to me doesn't seem like a really good idea. Like I would want the people who are overseeing the collection, storage, and use of our biometric data to not be worried about whether or not they have a place to sit down when they go into the office. So to me, that was a little bit disconcerting. I have not heard, any direct impacts on OBIM in terms of, the Doge cuts and things like that. So I think that is good. But please, let's not stress these people out. They are managing super sensitive personal data. We need them at their best.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this connects to a broader return to office, call like a trend. And I've seen companies, non-government companies that have parking spot challenges or
Yeah.
or hot desking. And that's not new. I remember 10 years ago when I worked at Hewlett Packard that you would hot desk with someone. Like you get the
Yeah.
morning desk and in the evening someone else comes in and works it. But something that has to be figured out for, in particular for
Well,
these
and again,
employees.
all of those are issues that, where biometric digital identity becomes critical. Who's using the workstation, who's got
Mhm.
access to the computer, who's getting into the network, all of those things kind of lead us back to using biometrics so we know who is accessing what at what time. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd love to segue into the next topic, which is something you shared with me over text. And this is around the deep fake detection market size. And then you and I had a chat before we started on this live. What do you think the market size is, and what do you think is happening with these
well,
numbers?
here's the deal. This is like one of my pet peeves. And honestly, it is the reason this whole situation is the reason that I started with my company, Acuity Market Intelligence, doing market forecasts, because there was this data point that everybody was referencing in the industry. This is back 10, 15 years ago. I think it was 15 years ago, about the size of the e-passport market. And I kept trying to figure out, where is this number coming from? And it turned out it was some random comment someone had made that had then basically populated across the industry and kept appearing in all these mainstream reports. And so what happened with this was, because we're finishing up our deepfakes and synthetic identity report, I was looking to see if anybody had actually forecasted, what the size of the deepfake detection market was. And I found a reference to something that Deloitte had said. And people saying, oh, Deloitte said the market is this big and it's growing this fast. I think you have the quote up there. Well, it turns out that's not what, quote, Deloitte said. It's what Deloitte got from looking at some Liminal, a Liminal report. And Liminal is a great organization. They do great work in the industry. They have great research, and they have some really fantastic models and AI. They're doing all kinds of really cool stuff. I'm like, okay, great. This is what Liminal said. Well, then it turned out that Liminal was referencing a Bloomberg article, and I don't know that Liminal actually directly said it was from Bloomberg. I'm trying to remember. I do think there were a couple other places when I was looking online that I did find reference to that this is what Bloomberg said. So then I looked at the Bloomberg article. It wasn't Bloomberg. It was some research company that, quite frankly, I've never heard of. I don't know how good they are or not. But the point is that people do this all the time in the industry. They grab a piece of data from some published report or article and they attribute it to that organization as the source. And it's just kind of a warning that people need to track this stuff down and figure out who they're quoting and make sure they understand the source and how reliable that source is before they just start throwing numbers out into the universe. Again, this is one of the reasons that, almost 15 years ago, Acuity started doing its own market forecasting models, and we didn't do it for the deepfakes report because I just don't feel like there's enough data out there to actually build a model that is going to tell us anything meaningful. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, it's just a kind of a warning to the wise. Be careful of where your data sources come from.
Yeah. So such a important piece of advice for those that are trying to do their strategy and their planning around what they
Yeah,
build is wait a second, like where did this data come from and how accurate is it and whatnot.
yeah.
But
Building a market
I
or
still
sales
continue to see
forecast.
stuff in the market that would lead to those thinking, hey, this is a growing market. Like this is a Wired article that I tagged today, "Deep Fake Scams in the Age of Paranoia," which I recommend just reading. It's interesting. I mean, it's not packed full
Yeah,
of
and it is
data
like there's
insights.
no question it's a growing market. We have a ton of data in the report about the incidence of deep fakes and where they're
Hmm.
appearing. And so there is a lot of good data out there. It's just as you mentioned earlier, when you're building a market forecast or a sales plan, you really need to have good data. Now, what I think is so interesting about Wired and their coverage of this is, what's happened with kind of the crazy times we live in is that Wired has now become a critical source for political information that impacts the federal government, really from the perspective of what's happening in the big tech sector. And they've done a lot of coverage of Doge, they've done a lot of coverage of what's happening with Elon Musk and some of the other big tech folks. And so Wired has kind of really elevated their brand to become a national source for political news around tech. And so to me, the fact that they're talking about this, right? They're now reaching a whole new audience of people that are not, maybe not tech focused, but are more just sort of following politics in the US. So I think this opens up this kind of information to a much broader audience. And I think that's incredibly useful.
Yeah, that's something that I saw at Marketplace Risk, where you and I and others in digital identity are living this every day. We're consuming the news and we're seeing the attacks, and then in an audience in a session that's not heard of these topics, it's mind blowing because they're seeing a deep fake lip sync for the first time. They're seeing how easy it is to prompt engineer fraud with fraud services. So it's great that the
Yeah,
mainstream media is picking these up.
and we know that the deep fakes are getting much better. Last night, I just finished binging the new Andor series. I'm a Star Trek nerd. I'm a sci-fi nerd, and the Andor series leads right into Rogue One. For those of you who are Star Wars fans, you
Yeah, you got to
understand this.
watch out. You're going to get people
I
upset. It's
know.
Star
And
Trek,
then
Star
to the
Wars, different.
right, the end of Rogue One, they basically deep faked a Carrie Fisher image because it links in actually to the Star Wars A New Hope, which was the first movie that came out, even though it was like the fourth in the series. But anyway, point being is they did this deep fake of Carrie Fisher, and I watched it. It was so bad, and I'm thinking, wow, the technology has gotten so much better in the last few years.
100%, 100%. Well, the music has stopped. We're at time. There's one
I
last
know we're
topic to
we're over
cover,
time. Sorry.
which is the upcoming report and some of the sponsors that you sent this in a LinkedIn post. Can you close it
Yeah,
out
we
with?
are we are we're so excited. I mean, we have some really premier sponsors. We're really happy that the FIDO Alliance recently joined, which is fantastic, and the Secure Technology Alliance. To me, having really industry organization stalwarts like that participating, I think just reinforces the value of what we're doing with the Prism Project. And we are still on target for publication, May 28th. That's the drop date. I think we do have a few more potential spots for logo sponsors. So if you want to see your logo up here with some of these premier companies in the industry, you can reach out to Steve or myself. We still have a couple, I think just a few more spots where we could fit logos in. So don't miss out on that opportunity.
Very cool. Well, May 28th, everyone mark their calendars. We'll have to do a stream like this just for that launch.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
Maxine,
and
we're at.
we'll be at Identiverse right after that. So if you want to
That's
talk to
right.
us about the report, and we'll have QR codes for everyone to download it. So we're really excited about that as well.
Great, great. Well, we're over time. Um, I think we could wrap up and wish everyone a great weekend ahead, and hopefully it's spring weather where you are, and it's
Yeah, we'll
sunny
see
and
what in the world of identity is going on next week. Stay
yeah.
tuned.
Bye.